My best friend only texted me when she needed a favor, so I started sending her itemized invoices for emotional labor. There is a specific rhythm to a one-sided friendship. It does not sound like shared laughter or mutual support. It sounds like the sharp, demanding buzz of a phone notification at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. For 5 years, my relationship with Vanessa operated entirely on her schedule. I was her unpaid therapist, her free graphic designer, and her emergency contact for every minor inconvenience. I mistook her constant need for my help as a sign of closeness, until the day I realized I was not a friend to her. I was a utility when she demanded I redesign her entire business brand over a single weekend. Ignoring my own deadlines, I decided to stop being a utility. I opened my laptop, created a professional invoice for my time, and hit send. I was about to teach her the true cost of my own friendship. Vanessa and I met during our freshman year of college, bonding over a shared love of obscure indie films and terrible dining hall coffee. Back then, the friendship felt reciprocal. We studied together, navigated the awkwardness of early adulthood, and supported each other through messy breakups. But as we transitioned into our late 20s, a subtle shift occurred. I launched my own freelance graphic design business, building a client roster from scratch. Vanessa, meanwhile, bounced between a series of unfulfilling retail management jobs, constantly searching for her true passion. As my professional responsibilities grew, my availability shrank. Yet the expectations of my time expanded to fill the void. She began treating my calendar as a suggestion and my skills as a communal resource. The transition was so gradual that I barely noticed it happening until I was entirely submerged in her endless demands. The favors started small, disguised as casual requests between friends. She would ask me to quickly format her resume, promising she would buy me lunch in return. The lunch never materialized, but I told myself it was just a friendly gesture. Then came the request for my professional expertise. She needed a logo for her side hustle selling handmade candles. I spent 12 hours designing a custom brand identity, complete with typography and color palettes. When I sent the final files, she replied with a single thumbs-up emoji and a text saying she would pay me once her shop turned a profit. That was 3 years ago. The shop is still operating, and I have never seen a cent. I rationalized my silence, convincing myself that charging a friend felt transactional and cold. I valued our history too much to bring up money, even as I watched my own bank account dwindle while I worked late into the night to finish her projects and my paying clients' work simultaneously. The physical toll was evident in the dark circles under my eyes and the constant tension in my shoulders, yet she remained entirely oblivious to my exhaustion. The dynamic worsened when Vanessa announced she was launching a boutique event planning company. This was not a casual side hustle. This was her grand vision, and she expected me to be the chief architect of its visual identity. She sent me a sprawling, chaotic mood board filled with conflicting aesthetics and vague concepts. She wanted a full brand overhaul, including a website design, business cards, social media templates, and a comprehensive style guide. She casually mentioned she needed it all completed by the following Friday, as she had a meeting with a potential investor. I reminded her that I was currently in the middle of a massive rebranding project for a corporate client, a project that was paying my rent for the next 2 months. I told her I could not take on another project, let alone one of that magnitude on such a tight deadline. She responded by calling me, bypassing my text boundaries entirely. Her voice was shrill, echoing slightly in my small home office as she paced around her own apartment, completely unbothered by the fact that she was interrupting my focused work time. During the call, she deployed every manipulative tactic in her arsenal. She guilted me, reminding me of how she supported me during my first year of business when I had no clients. She claimed this event planning company was her chance to finally get her life together, and that I was the only person she trusted to make it look professional. She told me that if I truly cared about her success, I would make the time. I sat at my desk, staring at the glowing monitor, listening to her voice oscillate between pleading and demanding. I looked at the stack of invoices for my actual clients who respected my time, paid my rates, and accepted my deadlines without question. Then I looked at the text thread with Vanessa, an endless scroll of her emergencies and my accommodations. Something inside me finally snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, crystalline realization. I was not her friend. I was her unpaid employee. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch across the phone line just long enough to make her uncomfortable. I told her I needed to check my schedule and would get back to her by the end of the day. She huffed, clearly annoyed that she was not getting an immediate submission, but agreed to wait. The moment I hung up, I opened a blank spreadsheet on my computer. I did not feel guilty anymore. The heavy, suffocating weight of obligation that usually accompanied her requests was gone, replaced by a cold, professional clarity. I began to calculate my standard hourly rate for brand development. I factored in the expedited rush fee for the tight Friday deadline, the cost of the stock photography she would inevitably demand, and the multiple revision rounds she always required. I itemized every single task, from the initial mood board review to the final file exports. I formatted the document perfectly, adding my business logo at the top and my payment terms at the bottom. The final number was staggering, reflecting the true market value of the work she was demanding. I saved the document as a PDF, attached it to an email, and drafted a brief, polite message. I was no longer her friend. I was her vendor, and vendors require payment. I hovered my cursor over the send button, appreciating the sheer irony of the situation. For 5 years, I had given her everything for free, and she treated it like a heavy burden. Now that I was charging her what she deserved, I knew she would likely refuse, but that was fine. The invoice was not about the money. It was about establishing a boundary she could no longer ignore. I took a final sip of my cold coffee, closed my eyes, and clicked send. The message delivered instantly, sealing the fate of our friendship and setting the stage for the inevitable fallout. I leaned back in my comfortable desk chair, waiting patiently for her phone to ring, knowing full well that the real battle for my personal respect was just beginning today. The read receipt on my email client lit up almost instantly. Vanessa was clearly hovering over her inbox, waiting for my design submission. I watched the little icon change from delivered to read. For 3 long minutes, nothing happened. I assumed she was parsing the line items, her eyes scanning past the typography design and landing hard on the bottom line total. Then my phone began to vibrate. It did not just buzz. It rattled against the wooden surface of my desk in a continuous angry staccato. I let it ring, 5 missed calls in 45 seconds. Finally, the calls stopped, replaced by a rapid-fire succession of text messages. I did not need to open them to know what they said, but I did anyway. They ranged from confused questions to outright hostility. I closed the messaging app, opened my actual design software, and went back to work for my paying client. I was not going to engage with her until she processed the reality of the document I had just sent. The piece lasted exactly 20 minutes. When she called again, I answered, putting her on speakerphone so I could keep my hands free to adjust a vector graphic on my monitor. Her voice was tight, pitched an octave higher than usual, vibrating with a mixture of disbelief and indignation. She demanded to know why I was trying to extort her. I kept my tone perfectly level, adopting the same customer service cadence I used with difficult corporate clients. I explained that my business had overhead, software subscriptions, and a strict policy against uncompensated labor. I reminded her that the scope of work she was requesting was equivalent to a $3,000 project for my commercial clients, and I was offering her a slight discount because of our history. She interrupted me, her voice rising. She brought up the time she let me stay on her couch when my apartment had a plumbing issue. She brought up the time she bought me a cheap bottle of wine for my birthday. She weaponized every minor, low-effort gesture she had ever made, stacking them up like receipts to prove that my invoice was a betrayal of our friendship. I listened to her entire monologue without interrupting. When she finally paused to take a breath, I simply asked if she intended to pay the invoice or if I needed to send a formal cancellation notice. The silence on the other end was thick and heavy. She hung up without answering. I assumed that was the end of it. I assumed her pride would prevent her from ever asking for another favor. I was entirely wrong. Vanessa did not accept the boundary. She decided to siege it. Over the next 3 days, she shifted her tactics from anger to aggressive guilt tripping. She started calling me at 9 in the morning, right as I was drinking my first cup of coffee, to cry about how stressed she was about the investor meeting. She sent me long, rambling voice memos at midnight, detailing her fears of failure and how I was the only person who understood her vision. She was deliberately trying to exhaust me, hoping that if she just wore down my resolve, I would cave and do the work for free just to make the emotional dumping stop. It was a toxic cycle I had participated in for years, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer absorbing her anxiety, I was auditing it. On the 4th day, after she sent me a particularly tearful 40-minute voice memo about her imposter syndrome, I opened my spreadsheet again. I created a new line item. I titled it Unscheduled Emotional Consultation and Mental Load Management. I charged her my standard freelance rate for the exact duration of the voice memo, plus a 20% surcharge for after-hours communication. I emailed her the new invoice, politely noting that future voice memos would be billed at the same rate. The response was immediate and entirely unhinged. She did not text. She did not call. Instead, she showed up. I was sitting in my home office, finalizing a logo for a local bakery, when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the security camera feed on my phone. Vanessa was standing on my front porch, and she was not alone. Standing next to her, Looking deeply uncomfortable and holding a casserole dish was Sarah, one of our mutual friends from college. Sarah was the peacemaker of our group, the person who always tried to smooth over conflicts and convince everyone to just get along. Vanessa was gesturing wildly at the door, her face flushed, clearly in the middle of a heated monologue. She had brought an audience. She had brought a mediator. She was trying to publicly shame me into submission, using our mutual friend as a witness to my supposed cruelty. I watched them on the screen as Sarah reached out and pressed the doorbell a second time, the chime echoing through my quiet house. Vanessa crossed her arms, staring directly into the camera lens, her expression a mask of triumphant expectation. She truly believed that with Sarah there to witness my eventual capitulation, I would have no choice but to open the door, apologize, and hand over the brand identity for free. I stood up from my desk, smoothing down my shirt, and walked toward the front hallway, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. I turned the brass deadbolt and pulled the heavy wooden door open, the cool evening air rushing into the warm hallway. Vanessa immediately stepped forward, her eyes bright with unshed, performative tears. She launched into a rehearsed monologue about how my invoice had broken her heart and how she felt completely abandoned in her time of need. She gestured wildly, painting a picture of a ruthless, greedy freelancer exploiting a struggling best friend. Beside her, Sarah shifted her weight from foot to foot, clutching a ceramic casserole dish like a shield. Sarah offered me a tight, apologetic smile, clearly uncomfortable with being dragged into the crossfire. I did not interrupt Vanessa. I let her speak, letting her exhaust her entire repertoire of guilt and manipulation right there on my welcome mat. When she finally paused to take a breath, expecting me to crumble and apologize, I simply stepped aside and gestured for them to enter the house. They walked into the foyer, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I led them to the kitchen island, the exact spot where I had spent countless unpaid hours designing Vanessa's logos. I asked if they wanted tea. Vanessa declined, crossing her arms and demanding to know why I was treating our friendship like a corporate transaction. Sarah set the casserole down and gently suggested we all just take a breath and talk it out like adults. I nodded, agreeing completely. I walked over to my home office, retrieved a thick black binder I had prepared the night before, and placed it squarely on the marble countertop. I told Vanessa that if she wanted to treat our friendship like a corporate transaction, I was more than happy to provide the full audit. I opened the binder. It was not just the invoice for the event planning brand. It was a comprehensive, itemized ledger of every single favor, design project, and late-night emotional crisis I had managed for her over the past 5 years. I turned to Sarah, who was looking at the binder with growing curiosity. I explained that while Vanessa was claiming I was extorting her for a single weekend of work, the reality was that I had been subsidizing her lifestyle and business aspirations for half a decade. I flipped to the first tab, showing the hours spent building her candle shop website. I pointed to the market rate for that service, and then the $0 she had actually paid me. I flipped to the next tab, detailing the resume formatting, the social media templates, and the endless hours of unpaid consulting. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the columns. The total value of the uncompensated labor I had provided to Vanessa was just over $14,000. Sarah looked up from the binder, her expression shifting from polite neutrality to profound shock. She turned to Vanessa, her voice quiet but firm, and asked if it was true that she had never paid for any of the branding for her candle company. Vanessa's performative tears instantly evaporated, replaced by a defensive, flushed anger. She stammered, claiming that friends do not keep score and that I was twisting the narrative to make her look bad. She tried to pivot back to her original argument, insisting that the invoice for the new project was just me being petty and vindictive. But the social mask had slipped, and Sarah was no longer buying the victim routine. Sarah picked up her purse, leaving the casserole on the counter, and told Vanessa that expecting thousands of dollars of free professional work was not friendship. It was exploitation. She looked at me, gave me a genuine supportive nod, and walked out the front door. Vanessa stood in my kitchen, completely stripped of her audience and her leverage. The silence between us was absolute. She looked at the binder, then at me, realizing that her primary weapon had been permanently dismantled. I closed the heavy binder and slid it back across the island toward her. I told her that the invoice for the event planning brand was still valid, but I was no longer accepting her as a client, regardless of her ability to pay. I explained that our personal friendship was also terminated, effective immediately. I asked her to leave my house and requested that she not contact me again. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might try one last desperate plea to salvage the dynamic. But she just grabbed her purse, her face a mask of humiliated fury, and marched out the door without a single word. I locked the deadbolt behind her, the heavy click echoing through the quiet hallway, followed by the sound of her car engine starting and tires pulling away from the curb. The aftermath of that evening was swift and entirely predictable. Without my free labor, Vanessa's event planning launch was a disaster. She hired a cheap designer from a gig economy website, and the resulting branding was a chaotic, unreadable mess that completely alienated her target demographic. Her investor pulled out after the first meeting, and the company folded within 6 months. She tried to smear my name in our mutual friend group, but Sarah had already shared the truth about the $14,000 ledger. The rest of our friends quietly distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be the next target of her endless entitlement. As for me, my design business flourished. I used the time I previously spent managing Vanessa's crises to take on 2 new high-paying corporate retainers. I learned that true friendship is built on mutual respect, not a continuous extraction of resources. Setting a boundary did not just protect my bank account, it protected my peace.